People thought that 2020 is the worst year ever. Little did they know that 2022 is going to be much worse. Not only we did not get rid of COVID, but we created massive inflation, huge supply chain problems, and now a war in the east of Europe, which is creating a shortage of wheat and oil in the market, pushing prices to rise worldwide. Some people are expecting a recession, others a depression, and some a stagflation. The problem is that at this point there aren't many things that the Fed can do. California's Governor Newsom suggested distributing cash to people to compensate them for hiking gas price. But that's not a solution. We tried that in 2020 and created massive inflation. But if it wasn't for printing money, the 2020 crisis would have been much worse. Remember what happened to the stock market in the first days of the pandemic? Let's hope that never repeats again. But with everything that's happening, there is a good chance that we are going to get into another financial crisis pretty soon. So here are a few things that you should know if you want to be ready and take advantage out of the next crisis. Give this video a thumbs up and let's start with the first one. You can't solve every problem with the printing press. Ideally, when you have a crisis, you have to fix the crisis to get out of it. If your business fails and you run out of money, you should cut back on your spendings, maybe go and live with your parents for a while, stop driving and take public transport. Or you can borrow money to keep your standard of living. However, sooner or later, you have to pay back that money. But what if your second business fails as well and you run out of money again? Can you borrow money again to maintain your standard of living? Maybe. But the question is, how many times can you do that? Once, twice, thrice? And that's the problem with the US. Ever since the dollar became the global currency reserve, the US kept borrowing money to get out of the financial crisis without suffering the pain. Think of the 2008 crash. Ideally, every company that gave junk loans or insured them should have suffered. But the government is like, if these companies would go bankrupt, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, would lose their jobs. So why not borrow money to just bail them out and we will pay that debt later? Boom! Instead of 10 or 15 years, the US is out of the crisis in a couple of years. In 2020, we were forced to stay in our homes, but we needed money to pay for the bills. So the government is like, don't worry, we'll send you stimulus checks. And the businesses are like, how about us? Don't worry, we'll also give you as much money as you want. So we got out of the crisis relatively easy. If this was done in any other country other than the US, it would have had hyperinflation because the currency isn't held as a reserve worldwide. Of course, other countries do print money as well, but not at the scale of the US. But that doesn't mean there is no limit to this printing money culture. The question is, how many more crises can we solve by printing money? We don't know, but if we fall into another recession because of rising oil prices and the war in Ukraine, the country is not in a position to force its way out of the crisis by throwing cash into the economy again, since the Fed is already planning to keep raising rates to tackle inflation. Yeah, rates were raised by just 0.25% in March, but that's the nature of the Fed. They wouldn't raise rates instantly by a huge percentage, but would do it gradually. Number 2. What if the dollar stops being the global currency reserve? People need something to preserve their wealth through. Gold is a great example. Of course, it's a pretty useless asset. There aren't many things you can do with it, but it does the job, despite its shortcomings. You can stash part of your wealth in real estate, stocks, bonds, but at the end of the day, you need an asset that is easily movable. That's why 60% of the global reserves are in the US dollar, since the dollar is backed by the most powerful economy in the world. But if people start losing faith in the dollar when they see that the Fed is simply printing trillions of dollars without shedding an eye, They will start looking at alternative currencies as a reserve currency such as the Chinese yuan, which already represents over 10% of the global currency reserves. This graph illustrates how many dollars are there in circulation. Until the 1970s, things were relatively stable, but pay attention at what happens after the 1980s. The amount of dollars in circulation rises significantly. How about 2008? Do you see how printing money got worse? Each time we say that we're going to solve this problem later, we end up printing more, like in 2020. Look at that hike! The moment the US loses its status as the world global reserve currency, this can easily turn into a huge inflation. Let's hope that doesn't happen anytime soon. This can lead you to think that holding cash is a bad idea. While it looks scary that your dollars might soon be worth nothing, the reality is that these changes do not happen overnight. For example, the British Empire was on the decline since the beginning of the 20th century, but its currency was still the global reserve currency. In fact, even after the First World War, 50% of the global currency reserves were in British pounds. And only after the Second World War, the British pound lost its place as the global currency reserve. So these kind of changes do not happen instantly, but recessions happen pretty often. Financial crises are part of the economic growth, and during crises, cash is the king. Since the economy is struggling, people are afraid to spend, which further worsens the crisis. So even great, valuable companies struggle and are usually sold at a fraction of what they're really worth. That's why it's always better to keep part of your wealth in cash, especially when it seems like we're headed into a recession. Number 4. Crypto is going to boom. In the middle of everything that's happening in the world, unstable assets get very volatile, and that includes crypto as well. But the absolute opposite is happening. Crypto is booming. Moving money around the globe is one of the main pillars of progress, and since the war is taking place in this part of the world, both nations are looking into crypto as a way out. You can donate to the Ukrainian central bank with cryptos, and Russia's elite are using crypto to get out their wealth from Russia, since Visa and MasterCard have sanctioned all cards that are issued within Russia. At the time of this script, Bitcoin is already booming. Since the beginning of the conflict, it already has risen by 15%. The exact same is happening with Ethereum. I'm not saying anything, but nowadays crypto is much more stable than some of the biggest tech companies such as Facebook. Number 5. Don't let anything distract you. Rising gas prices, unprecedented inflation, conflicts around the world push you to take emotional decisions. The truth is that the world has always been in chaos. A little over a decade ago, we had the housing crash. Some countries like Greece haven't recovered from that crisis yet. Prior to that, we had the dot-com bubble. For God's sake, we went through a world war, the biggest war in the history of mankind, where nuclear weapons were used. So what's happening now isn't anything close to what we have already been. Of course, there is always a possibility that everything could get worse, but that's not under your control. Your job is to stay focused on your financial goals and adapt to circumstances. That's the only way to financial freedom. Thanks for watching, and until next time.